Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with the founder of the Critical Thinking Institute, Dr. Steve Pearlman. He is known to kids around the world as the Steve Jobs of critical thinking. He holds 30-plus years of experience in higher education. Steve has comprehensively studied critical thinking through neuroscience, composition theory, cognitive psychology, educational theory, and other disciplines. He's a sought-after expert, keynote speaker, and media personality. He founded the Critical Thinking Institute, or CTI, to bring his breakthrough inside-out critical thinking method to everyone. He has taught critical thinking and writing in higher education, including elite liberal arts colleges and state universities. He's a great interview. Enjoy.
Hey, Steve, it's Joe Dimino.
Hey, Joe. How are you doing?
I'm wonderful. How are you today?
I'm great. Absolutely great.
My first question to you is this. How did you survive the last 2 years with the pandemic and the lockdowns? And how did that time period subsequently change not only the way that you as a human view this life, but the way that you conduct business?
Well, I guess for me, the lockdown really impressed upon me the importance of social interaction and how much, despite the fact that I'm an academic and who likes to sit and read and write all by myself, the need for us to really be able to interact with each other, not just online and the insufficiency of interacting with each other online, but in person, and how healthy it is for our brains to be able to have that kind of one-to-one interaction with each other. In fact, there's so much research that our brains actually interact very differently with people when we're in a physical space with them than we're mediated through any kind of other medium or computer or what have you.
So let me ask you this. Let me get kind of to the essence of who you are and what you do and what makes you who you are. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids at a career day, and one of them looks up at you and says, "What do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
Well, I have answered that child, and many times. And the way I answer it is say, I teach people how to think better. And what I try to explain to them is that they all have a capacity to think critically. Everyone has an innate capacity to think critically. In fact, the thing that makes our species distinct from other species is our capacity to think critically. It's baked into us because we're not stronger than the bear, we're not faster than the bear, we don't have bigger teeth than the bear, we don't have bigger claws than the bear, but we're able to outthink the bear. And if we weren't able to do that, if that wasn't our main survival mechanism, none of us would be here today because all of our ancestors would have been food for something else. So we have this baked-in ability to think critically, and we all do it. The question is, do we know what we do when we do it? Can we master that process? Because, well, think of it like this. As I always like to say, everyone, just about everyone on Earth has some natural capacity to run. Some people are a little faster than others, naturally speaking, but anyone could learn to train themselves to be a better runner. We have a science about that. We have coaching methods. We have wind sprints. We have posture. We have all kinds of analytics and strategies for learning how to run better. So we take this innate ability that most of us have to run, and then we have ways to amplify that and refine it and exercise it and become better at it. Thinking is the same way. We all have a natural ability to think. We all think all the time. We're always making decisions and dealing with ideas and so forth, right? But very few people ever get any explicit instruction in what their brain is doing when they're thinking and how to improve upon it. And that's what I tell kids, and they understand that.
So there is almost a level of this that's in that Darwinian realm of survival of the fittest, pushing our evolved brains to another level. Is there kind of a cornerstone, a capstone that involves that notion?
Well, I think that's certainly how our brains evolved to get better, was through this Darwinian process. There's no question about it, because we can look at earlier skulls and so forth, and we can understand the distinctions in brain size and probably what was going on within them based on earlier man. So there's no question that our brains evolved, Homo sapiens brain evolved the best out of all the other species. And that's what enabled us to prevail as the dominant species on the planet. Now, we're not always doing that in the best ways necessarily, right? But survival of the species doesn't necessarily always have the most foresight to it. And that's also what we're facing now.
So when you were in the third grade, what did you want to do when you grew up?
I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was in the third grade, because I think, it was such a different world then. And even then, when I was in the third grade, and I guess we're talking now 45 years ago-ish, something like that, maybe around there, the question wasn't pressed upon kids as early at that time, which I think was healthier. By the way, I think we put much too much pressure on kids right now to ask them what they want to do when they grow up instead of asking them who do they want to be when they grow up. But I do remember sitting in class and always admiring teachers. And I always thought teaching was such a noble profession, and that was something that was instilled in me by my parents. Though I was very frustrated in school in certain respects, and also remember thinking, even at that time, I think there are some things about what we're doing here that probably aren't the best thing that we should be doing. And I'm articulating it much better now, of course, and much more self-awarely now than I did then. But nevertheless, even then, I remember thinking in school, something here just doesn't seem right. And in fact, I remember I was in maybe seventh grade, and a friend of mine, his girlfriend broke up with him. And of course, it was, the greatest life trauma that ever happened to any individual ever in the history of the world. And the suffering that he was enduring was unlike anyone's suffering ever in the history of the world, and so forth. And he'd thrown around killing himself as a thing. And back then, that wasn't something we took nearly as seriously if someone said it as we should now, of course, right? Because it's a much different kind of world and different kind of problem now. But I knew that he wasn't really going to do that, and he knew that he wasn't really going to do that. But I also remembered thinking at that moment that school had in no way ever prepared me to deal with a friend who was in such distress. And I thought, that's kind of weird, right? That here I have spent, at that point, a healthy 7 or 8 years in education, quite a lot of my day and effort spent being educated, and I don't know how to help my friend any better because of it. And that struck me at that moment as particularly wrong. And that, I think, has sat with me for many years in terms of what we're doing as educators and how we can do it better.
So are you happy now when you look back at what you thought maybe you wanted to do when you were younger, or who you wanted to be? Are you happy with who you are now and what you've chosen to do with your life?
That's a fascinating question. Sure. Yeah, I'm very happy now with what I am and what I'm doing. Of course, as I look back with hindsight, I think, wow, I could have probably gotten here sooner had I been a little more self-aware and knew really what I wanted to try to accomplish. But that's all right, because we all have better hindsight than foresight. But yeah, I'm very happy with what I'm doing now because I've made a difference in educational circles, not just in the students with whom I've worked directly, but with other educators in teaching them how to teach other people to think critically and make education more neuroscientifically sound, more exciting for students, more productive, more rewarding. And of course, now through the Critical Thinking Institute, I'm going to be able to reach everyone around the world with the same kind of skill sets. So yeah, I'm very happy with what I've accomplished and what I'm doing.
So, the one thing that's very key about our lives as we develop and become who we are is those that we look up to. Who's been a role model or a hero for you?
I think hero might be a strong word for me, but I've had a lot of role models throughout my life for sure. One of them was my Chaucer professor at college, a guy named Tom Cannon, who is an absolutely brilliant individual on so many different levels, and a tragic one in certain respects as well. But he was the one who opened my eyes to the idea, because I was an English major, and he opened my eyes to the idea that literature should be studied as a philosophical text. That he used to say, if a book doesn't help you on your next date, throw it out. And he also said, books should be kept in the medicine cabinets for good books for when we really need them. And he was very serious about it. I was at his house a few times. I never checked his medicine cabinet, but I wouldn't have been surprised if there was a book or two in there. And that really changed my whole paradigm about literature and also somewhat about education as a whole, about the pragmatism of it. And, it's something I've said to my students repeatedly over the years. If a book doesn't help you on your next date, throw it out. With, not literally necessarily, but the point being, right, literature should be there to make our lives better, to understand the human condition, whatever that is, in some ways. Because whatever problems people were facing or whatever constructs there were at different time periods, or even science fiction or whatever we're reading, there are direct overlays into our own world, into our own lives, and so forth. And if we read them that way and try to understand what the philosophy is there and what it's teaching us about life, then we can live better. And I think that was a great lesson for me.
So let me kind of ask you a pie-in-the-sky question here, and it's this. If you could meet anybody alive on the planet right now and have a discussion with them, who would it be?
That's a tough question. I guess there are so many people that I'd really like to meet on the planet right now. I would say the Dalai Lama would rise quickly to the top of that, just because I think his particular capacity to look at the world is so distinctive and so interesting. But I think another person, given the current circumstances in the world right now, would be Zelensky, because, here's a guy who was sort of a comedian and a TV host and so forth, and went on to, lead his country, at least so far, with remarkable success in a war against a much larger opponent and so forth. And I would love to be able to talk to him for a while and see what goes on through his head and how he views the world and how he's able to, it seems, keep a sense of humor through all of that. It's just absolutely unbelievable, given the strife, given the challenges that are before him, given the responsibilities and the burdens on his shoulders. The way he's able to compose himself must be absolutely incredible. So I think he would be someone else that I'd really absolutely love to be able to sit down and have a long conversation with.
Yeah, I love the story of how fiction became reality and kind of vice versa, looking in the mirror with him. The one thing probably about talking to someone like Zelensky is that, you want to get to the essence of what really kind of drives their daily, their motivating factors. And for you, when you wake up every day, there's things you do, things you look forward to. What is it that drives you and makes you wake up and do what you do? And also, at the end of the day, how do you quantify a good day? How do you lean back at the end of the day and say, man, that worked out, that was good?
I've thought about this a lot, and I don't think I can really put my finger on it, because it's something that vexes me to a certain extent, because I have this, arguably healthy, arguably partially unhealthy compulsion to, I think, make the world better in a sense. And I don't mean that to be so braggadocio, but what I'm saying is I feel like I have some knowledge here about critical thinking, and in my previous business was on, we did sexual assault prevention training and around other social issues like binge drinking and so forth for college students. But I feel like if I have this capacity, if I have this knowledge, and I'm not saying that I'm the only one, and maybe I'm not the best at it or what have you, right? But I have something here that I feel can contribute to the society. I really have this compulsion to try to do it, and I've always been that way. If it felt like there was something I could do that would make things better in a certain way, or improve the world, or take agency in the world, I felt this compulsion to do it. And so I very rarely feel like I had a very good day, because I never feel like I've really done enough in that respect. And but I'll tell you one good day I really did have one time. And as I said, we had this program on, my previous company, Student Success, was about sexual assault prevention, and among other things. And every once in a while, really not that infrequently, a few times a week usually, we'd get an email from somebody who, we got a lot of emails from people who complained about this or that about our programming, because we were, calling men this, or we were doing that. A lot of times very ill-conceived emotional reactions to what we were doing. But some of them that we got were also exceptionally positive. One time we got an email from a woman who said that she had been out, went on a date with this guy, I think they went back to his place, if I remember correctly. I have the email. I should go reread it. And it was feeling really wrong. He was getting very strange, and things were getting very, very uncomfortable with him. And she felt trapped. She didn't feel like he would let her leave. And in fact, maybe she tried, and he, was in some way obstructing her exit from his apartment. And she had remembered from our programming what we had called, verbal de-escalation or verbal judo at the time, which is actually by another guy who wrote a book on verbal judo. And so she just remembered that she could just keep talking to him and asking him questions and keep this process of conversation going in some way, and that's what she did, and eventually was able to exit the apartment. 2 weeks later, the day before she wrote us the email, 2 weeks later, the guy was arrested, and he was a serial killer. So without question, we probably saved her life. That was a good day. I slept well that night. Yeah.
That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. I'm curious, as you look down kind of the different avenues and the paths that you've taken in life, we're only as good as the wisdom that we get and by proxy kind of use that in our favor. If you have a dream tonight and run into your 20-year-old version of yourself and you could give that young version of you a piece of advice based on what you've learned in your life, the wisdom that you've gained, what would you tell your young version?
I tell him, so many things. I'll pick two. I think the first thing I would tell him would be listen to people more. Something I didn't do earlier on. It's not that I didn't listen to what people were saying, but I didn't really sometimes stop to hear them. I didn't really first put enough attention into their experience and where they were coming from and their perspective. I didn't have enough of selflessness in listening and humility in listening to them. Not that I didn't care about them, not that I wasn't interested in what they had to say. I was interested in what they had to say, but it's not as much about who they were and why they were saying it and what their motivations were and their experiences were. And then the other thing I would tell them is adapt. Change is the only real constant, and be fluid as you go through things. Be willing to change in certain ways. And in certain ways, I was very prone to change. I changed much more than most people I knew in certain respects because, many educators, they find a way to teach and they keep teaching that way. And I've never done that. I was always radically changing my approach to always try to make it better. So in certain ways, I really embraced change. But I think as a self, as a person, I probably didn't embrace it within myself enough. So that's another piece of advice I would give.
So everyone out there has a perception of you, your family, your friends, those that you work with, but ultimately you're in control of your life and how you live it. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Well, I think I'm a very good-hearted person, that's for sure. And, but I think in terms of one of the things that drives me and makes me happy, I said this to a friend of mine when I was maybe 35 or something like that. And I said, he'd known me since I was a teenager. I said, I think I've realized that I'm not happy unless I'm creating something. And he laughed his ass off. And he said, I could have told you that 15 years ago. What are you talking about? You just figured that out about yourself? I said, yeah, I did. Why didn't you tell me? Because, I'd be happier. He said, yeah. He said, I thought you knew. So I think that's definitely something about me, is that I'm not happy unless I'm creating. If I feel stagnant, I get very, very distressed.
So, Steve, if anybody out there wants to learn more about you, know more about what you do, anything revolving around your world, where can they go?
Sure. That's a great question. They go to a couple places. If you're a parent, you can listen to my podcast, Parentology, which offers research-based parenting snippets for parents on little things. It's a little thing each week. There's 15-minute episodes, so you can get it on the way to the grocery store, and it's about how are you going to do a little something to help your kid become a better critical thinker or student or better behaved and things like that. It's from research, it's from myself or from other experts in their field. But also, please go to the Critical Thinking Institute at thectinstitute.com. And when you get there, you'll see that we have programming available that teaches critical thinking skills. We have two programs. One's for kids because it's animated, And it's also for adults who like cartoons, which there are many adults out there who prefer watching cartoons. Good for them. It's the same content as our teens and adult program, which is you got to deal with me blathering at the screen a little bit more. But both of these work on neuroscientific foundations for mastering how your own brain works. And that leads you to be able to accomplish and achieve all those things you want to be able to do in your life. And that's what we're trying to do. That's our mission at the Critical Thinking Institute.
Steve, this has been great. Thank you for opening up. I'm so glad that we can connect. Have a great 2023, man.
You too. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can also subscribe to us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.